1891 and is just therefore into his 100th year. Mr. Piper was a veteran who served in World War I with the Royal Naval Aerial Services. Some of the questions we're going to ask Mr. Piper today are to fill in some background about life in Australia before World War I in order to set the scene. Mr. Piper, you grew up in Melbourne?
I grew up in Melbourne, yes.
And you moved over to Tasmania at the end of World War I?
Came over here in the end of World War, that's correct.
I see. Now, I believe you were a pattern maker by trade.
Yes, that's correct.
For the benefit of our viewers, could you explain very briefly what a pattern maker does?
Well, a pattern maker, if a thing wants to be made up in iron, they have a pattern made of it in wood. And that wooden pattern is pressed down into moulding sand in moulding boxes, as it is known. They have a top box and a bottom box. The top box covers the whole thing, has an opening where molten metal, whether it's brass or iron or steel, whatever the article is required in, the metal is poured in, and when it is cool, they take the box off, take the bottom thing, tip it over. There we have the iron or the cast metal thing, the same shape as the wood in metal. Mm-hmm. Now, a pattern maker is called upon to do innumerable types of metal work or woodwork, or to make the steel or metal thing. Therefore, he has to be well versed in reading all types of mechanical drawing.
I see.
And I spent my time at one of the best firms in Melbourne, the Australotus Engineering Company. They made a lot of mineral machinery for the mines. When I was an apprentice, I made a lot of bridge work for tin dredging in the in various parts of the world, and also they made patterns, made engines of all types. Mostly the old steam reciprocating engine.
I see.
And
as it turned out, Mr. Piper, your background as a pattern maker was very useful when you first joined the Royal Navy Aerial Services, and perhaps we could come to that later on in the interview.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that may be of interest for our viewers today is that life was very different compared to today. At the turn of the century, family life was very close.
That's very true. Keep on anymore.
And can you give the viewers an idea of some of the leisure pursuits that you took part in?
Some of the
leisure pursuits?
Measures.
You were involved in gymnastics, I believe?
Oh, yes. Yes, I was rather a keen gymnast. In fact, I captained two gymnasium clubs, and I got a display in the Melbourne Town Hall one night with others. I'd be aged then about, I should say, 20, 21. But I've always been very keen on gymnastic work, and wherever I've been. Once I married and came over to Tasmania, I formed a gymnasium club here in Ulverston.
I see. Can you give the viewers an idea for a gentleman who wanted to take out a young lady? Most occasions they would have needed a chaperone in those days.
They had a chaperone up to wartime, as far as I can remember. My wife would always chaperone whenever I took her to a dance. But I think that all lapsed after or during the war. And I don't think it's been taken up since, to my knowledge.
In February of 1914, you decided to depart Australia, and in fact you ended up in England on a working holiday.
Yes, I went with the view of getting up on the Clyde Bank, where all the big ships are built. And it was during that holiday that war broke out. I hadn't followed politics very closely, but I was alarmed one morning from my window when I was getting dressed to see opposite me in the newsagent's shop, Britain declares war on Germany. I thought, oh goodness gracious me, what am I going to do? Well, I write to the High Commissioner. So I wrote to the Australian Commissioner, see if I could join one overseas service or battalion. He said it was a little early yet, but he'd let me know. Well, I wasn't satisfied with that. I wrote through to the Admiralty and asked them could I join the Navy. And they referred me, after a bit of talk, to the Naval Air Service, that they were forming a Naval Air Service, and they wanted such men as me to form the nucleus. And I was sent down to Hendon, which was then a flying school in England, and they put me through a trade course. I had to make an interplane strut.
I see.
The strut is the one that holds both the wings together. And the instructor said to me, my word, this is a perfect job. He said, well, what was your job? I told him then that I was a pattern maker. And that was recorded, of course, in my records.
In fact, it's a little ironic that your skill as a pattern maker kept you out of flying for some time, didn't it?
Yes, it did. They put me in the wireless experimental school where I made all the patterns for the different fittings that were required for various airtype and various sets that they were making. And I worked very hard. I had a lot of overtime to do to get things done on time. But they gave me the run of the foundry in Chatham, and any special pattern which wanted particular care, I used to go up to the foundry and see the naval founder there. And from there, I went to one of the early flying schools, and they put me in charge of a little workshop to make all the patterns. But I told them I did not want to stop here. I wanted to join the flying service. Anyhow, I was boarded or kept on the job. And at such a time, I'd been there about 3 months. And I applied to the CO for a transfer to the flying branch. I wanted to be a pilot. And I applied to the right source and went through a very big course. And they took the results of, I think, about 24 of us out of about 100 were chosen. And they called upon me, they said, look, I think you'd make a better observer than you would a pilot, because your calling is be a greater advantage than flying. I said, no, I want to be a pilot. Well, whilst you're in the Navy, you've got to do what you're told. I said, yes, I quite agree, sir. And I had to do what I was told. Yes. And they sent me to one of the early bases where they're forming a flying course. And I stopped there, I suppose, 6 or 8 months and applied again. And I had to go up before the commandant, who happened to be a colonel of the Royal Marines.
Yes. Eventually, though, Mr.
I had to go back to...
Eventually, though, you finally got your wings.
Finally, yes, had to make a second application and finally got through they put me through an observer course first, and I still then applied for flying. But I was sent out the Eastern Mediterranean as a pilot, as an observer. They are very short of trained observers out there, because the observers wanted to pick up various seaplane bases, submarine bases, particularly submarines. So I went out to this place. Fortunately, I knew the CO and told him, oh, he said, don't worry, we'll put you through a course while you're here. So I served out there as an observer, I suppose, for 3 or 4 months. And they gradually taught me to fly these Henry Farmans. The Henry Farman was a machine particularly adapted for the submarine work. It only had a speed, top speed of 120 miles an hour, and it gave you ample room to see everything around you, gave you time to act if you had to drop a bomb or report. And I served with them, must have been 8 months, near enough.
And they had an open cockpit, I believe?
They had an open cockpit, but dual control.
I see.
And you set just the back of your pilot, and you turned forward and shout into his ear. Well, it hadn't been long before we swapped places, and after I learned to land and take off, which are the 2 main things in flying, particularly landing. Once you're in the air, you can make a blue at all, and you've got time to pick up. Not so with these machines. They never flew much above, I suppose 4,000 would be about the highest they'd go. They weren't built for height. They're built for low speed work.
Yes.
Well, I served with them for about 8 months.
Now this was at Lemnos.
This was at Lemnos.
And the idea of the Royal Navy Aerial Service being in that area, therefore, was to observe submarines. Submarines,
and also, at that time, there was a breakaway from the German fleet of one of their battle cruisers, named the Goben, and the light cruiser, who was a consort called the Brestlav. They sought refuge through the Dardanelles up into the Sea of Marmara, and they harboured her there, and we had to watch, and the fleet was kept there particularly to watch these 2 ships that she didn't get out among shipping. And that was our chief aim, was to keep watch over these 2 vessels as they didn't get away into the shipping way. And that was absolutely the reason they kept a branch of the British Aegean Naval Squadron in that area, particularly to watch these 2 ships didn't get out.
I see. Now, occasionally, there would have been air raids. Did you conduct any air raids on Gallipoli?
Yes, I had air raids in Gallipoli. I couldn't tell you how many times. 1 week, when the Goben ran on the Narrows, which is the top point of you come in through the Cape TV, up the Narrows, and up the Dardanelles, and there are 2 points, both armed, what they call the Narrows, in the Dardanelles. Well, we bombed those places in 1 week 13 times, simply because the Goben had run ashore on one to save her from sinking after the battle, after we'd bombed her. And she was trying to evade us, and it was during that evasive action she ran into a minefield. Well then, when she got up on this point, Nagara Point I think it was called, we knew she was damaged, and they put working parties on her night and day, Germans, to get away. And she was there for just about a fortnight, and Eventually we thought she'd never get away. And they called this day, we had a day and night watch over her. And they ceased that. And 2 days after the ceased, she broke away and came down the Dardanelles to do a bombing game. And she had to pass by a point on the island of Lemnos to get around out into the ocean. And as she passed, they had a monitor there and a little small port. And as they passed, they bombed this monitor, sunk her, they destroyed the port, they put their shells over the island into our aerodrome, and that alerted us. We were up in the air, and when we got up, the Brestlav had run into a minefield just off Lemnos, and I saw her turn over. She'd run into 2 mines and blew a bow completely off, and she went down by the head, and I saw her from above go over, sink. Well, then her ship that she was consorting, the Goben, steamed south to get away, and then we followed her. And the first time we bombed her, she just made a few evasive actions. We went back to the aerodrome, bombed up again. And I took over the second time. I was with my co-pilot first time. Second time I came out and found her on a southerly course. Well, we soon caught up to her in the air. As soon as we got near bombing her, she started evasive action. And I never got a chance to point to my co-pilot to drop his bomb, because as soon as he got a sight on her, she'd move. She knew what we were doing. Well, we followed her up, I suppose a matter of about 5 miles or so, and one turn, she ran right into a minefield and blew a port bow off. Well, we came back, reported that she'd run into a mine, was down by the head, and was heading back to the Dardanelles. We came back again, went back again. We bombed her then, went back again, loaded up again. By that time she was limping up the Dardanelles. And finally we saw her aground on a point. At a point.
This was significant, Mr. Piper, because I believe this was the first occasion that a successful air bombing caused
the London papers, or in England, matter of fact, the whole of the Navy were alarmed at the fact that an aircraft would, that a ship would take notice of a small aircraft. After all, if we dropped a bomb, it would only bounce off. I mean, we only carried 250-pound bombs, too. If we had struck her deck, she'd have exploded, made not a scrap of difference to her. You'd have had to hit her on the bridge or the conning tower or some vital point to put her out of action. Yes. As far as bombing a ship to sink her in those days, it was a matter of impossibility. Well, now, you take the last war, take Pearl Harbor.
We've discussed before about all the marvellous improvements of aircraft design today, but I believe that there were some narrow misses for you in those types of aircraft that you flew at that time. Can you give us an idea of some of the problems that you encountered?
And now, you mean in the Henry Farman or?
In the Henry Farman?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, they were a most reliable machine. And I can never remember, only one occasion when my pilot, when I went into his machine to trace this airplane, the tub that had been reported, It's the only time I can remember any trouble with the Henry Farman, and that wasn't the fireman's machine's fault. It was the pilot's fault. He throttled too quickly, and she misfired. And of course, when you're only flying at 1,000 feet, it doesn't take long to drop that distance. But taking it all through, I should say we had no trouble whatever with those Henry Farman machines, neither structurally nor from the engine point of view, power point of view.
I see. Now, there were several forced landings as a result of misadventure, shall we say.
Yes.
And eventually, as a result of chasing the Goben and the other cruiser, on your return from one of those flights, there was a concern about fuel shortage, and in fact that caused yourself and the pilot to undertake a forced landing, Lemnos,
yes,
and return to the normal reconnaissance flying.
Yes.
Can you tell us, though, about your experience with eventually being captured by the Turkish soldiers?
A little bit more. Well, I think I mentioned about the Turkish cavalryman taking his tuning off, beating the flames off out of the...
Can we go back a step and explain to our viewers what led you to be in that situation where you were captured by the Turks, though?
Yes, that's a fair enough question. We were running short of petrol, and we thought we might be able to make a little island called Shemathraki, just a little island right up in the Aegean. And once we found we couldn't make it, we had to land, and we landed in this olive grove. And that's on a return from a trip we'd made to find out where the Goben had been taken to.
And at that stage when you crash landed, you tried to set fire to the aircraft, I believe?
Yes, that's the rule in the Air Force. If ever you land in the enemy country, to burn your machine. And that's what we attempted to do.
So they stopped you from doing that, and eventually you were captured by them, of course.
Eventually, it's strange to say, when we were in a little an imprisoned little room in Gallipoli town itself, we saw a lorry go by with our two wings on it. And evidently they'd stripped the machine and they were taking it down to an aerodrome on the peninsula. There's a place called Galati, and they had mostly Germans.
But whilst you were at Gallipoli, you did have an opportunity to do some considerable sightseeing.
Yes, we were very fortunate, after arriving at Gallipoli town, to be met by a young Turkish lieutenant. And he said to us, "Bad luck for you gentlemen of record, but you'll find you will get on very well with my countrymen." I said, "Oh, excuse me, you speak perfect English. Where did you learn your English?" "Oh," he said, "I'm a doctor of something at the Edinburgh University, just home on leave." So he took us in hand and took us all around Gallipoli. My first impression of Gallipoli itself, Gallipoli town, was half the town was wrecked and the other half undamaged. And I happened to say to him, "Why all this damage here and not there?" "Well now," he said, "you know this place was shelled by the Queen Elizabeth." I said, "Yes, we know that." "Well, you should know the trajectory of those shells had to miss the top of that hill." And he said the shells went over the hill into the town. and those underneath, of course, were not damaged. I said, yes, I should have realised that.
The Queen Elizabeth, of course, was one of the support ships.
That's right, she was at Edilen at that time.
And that was part of the invasion of Gallipoli in 1915. But just for the benefit of our viewers, Mr. Piper, we should stress that by the time you arrived at Gallipoli, in fact it was 1918, so it was a couple of years later.
So the Anzac course was a bygone day. It been, we didn't see much of it, only from the air. And we were not taken down to Anzac Cove by the Turk. He took us right down to the headquarters, which was a bit south of Gallipoli town.
I see.
And there we spent several days, and they treated us remarkably well.
So really, that was a stroke of good luck to come across this particular lieutenant.
It certainly was.
It appears that in general the Turkish people did treat the prisoners quite well. The Turks did treat you quite well in general?
Exceptionally well. Not so much. Being an officer, they did treat all the officers remarkably well. And so much so, the head of the whole of the army, not so much, being an officer, they did treat all the officers remarkably well. And so much so, the head of the whole of the army, Turkish army, he was a pasha.
Oh, yes.
And he demanded to see us, and invited us to dine with him, which we did. And he was a perfect gentleman. We did all our converse through an Armenian interpreter, and he fired all sorts of questions to me, and we found him exceptionally nice. And he told one thing rather amused us. He said, we thought all you Australians were black people until the war came on. Then we knew differently.
Yes. In your autobiography, you mention about being interrogated by the Turks, and in fact, it appears they did have a great deal of respect for Australians.
They did so. And I think for the English too, not only because we're being Australian, for the English too. I might mention here, I have great respect for the Turks and Turkish people. I think they treated their prisoners remarkably well. They were being bled by the Germans for every bit of fat and grease they could get, because the army, German army, was so short of all those things.
Yes.
They bled Turkey of everything they wanted. And I might tell you here, the Germans and the Turks detested the Germans, although they're their allies.
Now,
often, those that could speak English told us many times, we should have been with England, not with the Germans.
Yes, that's
that
interesting.
Was their attitude.
And that comes out later on in your autobiography, but we've just mentioned the treatment of prisoners.
Yeah.
Now, you were transferred to Constantinople. Can you give us an idea about the prison facilities at Constantinople?
Well, they were exceptionally poor. We went to Constantinople, let me see, was it before? Yes, up in Constantinople, we were put in an office, a big office. We sat there for 2 hours and wondered what was happening. And the Turks had 2 or 3 Armenian interpreters doing the job, and then one of them came over to us and said to us, the CO, no, he came over to us, he said, I think you have been neglected. And my co-pilot he would be senior to me. Of course, he was a flight commander, flight lieutenant. Yes, flight lieutenant. I was just an ordinary pilot. And he said to me, said to us, "You have been neglected." And my pilot flew into him. He said, "Well, we demand now to see the CO of this concern." So a few minutes later, he took us down into an office where there was a German, I think he'd be a German general in charge of this place. And he apologised to us for our treatment, said, "You had been neglected. I did not know you were down there until this morning, till you sent the message to him." Now he said to us, "My apologies. Now what do you want?" We said, "Well, first of all, we want a bath. We want a haircut and a shave." We'd been in the prison and camped there for 4 days in this room, neglected. And my co-pilot said, "You know, this is no way to treat British prisoners, sir." And this general said, "Yes, I have apologised. Didn't like being caused." Well, he said, "You will hear more of this after the war." Oh, he says, "No need to go into that now, and no need to show any rapture about it. It'd be to your disadvantage if you do." So we realised that we were in their hands, had to accept. Anyhow, we got our razor. They gave us a German razor, and a barber shaved us, cut our hair, and now he said, "What else do you want?" I said, "Well, we want underclothes. We've been in these now for 4 or 5 days." And they gave us some linen underclothing. It was cold weather then, and it wasn't very pleasant. And then we said, "Well, we demand to see our embassy." I think who was the Swiss. Yes, the Swiss embassy represented England at that particular time in this area. Anyhow, well, you will be seeing the Swiss consulate in due course. Well, we saw the consulate, and he said, "Well, I'll give you some Turkish money so that you can buy anything that you want." And he said, "I will take you to my home." And he took us home on the outskirts, and whilst we were there, two other Australians that happened to prove to be flying men were brought in too. And the 3 of us sat and spoke to this embassy, the Swiss ambassador's wife, who spoke very good English. And she said, "Well, I suppose you boys haven't had any cake for some time." And we smiled. She brought in the cake, so we cut it into 3 pieces. Well, I had a piece of cake. And from there, where did we go?
No, to Gediz'e.
Gediz'e.
To a prisoner of war camp?
Yes. Whilst in Constantinople, we met an Indian Army colonel, a colonel of the Gurkhas. And we saw him at the main prison camp just before departure. And he said, "Oh, you boys, where are you from? Where were you? How came you here?" We told him about being shot down and the petrol tank being petrol. And he said, "Where are you going?" "Well, we're going to some prison camp." Well, he said, I've been on leave from Gediz'e. He said, "For heaven's sake, don't go to the other camp. Ask to be said Gediz'e. Can you say Gediz'e?" We said, "Yes, Gediz'e." So when we were taken to the next room, depositions taken, and he said, "Well, you're going to either the 2 camps. You've got to go to..." I said, "Well, we want to go to Gediz'e, where the colonel is." "Very well." And we were sent to Gediz'e on a horse and donkey trap, and took us 2 or 3 days to get there. But they put us up at two different villages whilst on the way there. And when I arrived at that camp at 9, it would be 9 o'clock at night, the CEO of the prison camp, or his orderly, took us into the main room and introduced me. He said, this young boy, he was only a young man, will be your bestman until we can settle you up.
Now, it's interesting to many people who hear about your time in captivity, there was some degree of freedom of movement outside the camp.
Perfect freedom. We had to give out, the colonel said before you can go to Kidos, he said you will be demanded of your parole. And we both immediately said, well, what would the Admiralty think if we gave our patrol as prisoners? He said the Admiralty would much rather see you 2 young men return back to England in reasonable health and their health all broken down. Now he said, you take my advice to give you parole, that you won't escape. So we looked at each other. I said, well, that sounds sensible enough. So we gave our parole. So we were not guarded all the time.
I see.
When we got in our main prison camp in Kidos, we had the freedom of a 9-mile walk all around. We could go further, but it had to be a party of 3 or 4, and we had to take two soldiers with us. So we walked on a Sunday. Generally every second Sunday we'd get 2 soldiers and we'd go for walk for a whole day. Early morning, walk a 9 or 10 mile and a good long walk. And quite enjoyed the freedom of the beautiful country out there and amongst the mountains. We finish up midday at that little place, or a chai they call it, little creek. We all stripped off and had a swim in this creek. So we had a fair amount of freedom in that respect.
That surprises a lot of people. How did you get on with the Turkish guards then?
With the Turkish
guards?
Very well. They were old men, too old for the front line. And they had all the youth of the towns taken up because they were so short of men. But they took the old men and the youths who were able to carry a rifle out of all the villages. So that's how things were with the public there.
I see.
We could walk anywhere around Kidos. It was a spread out village, and they got to know us. We used to have money to buy cheese or some of their own baked bread, and quite an amount of freedom.
And that money was sent by your relatives from home?
Yes, I had quite a bit sent to me, which I never got. Also parcels, I never got parcels. They never got further than Constantinople because the Turks commandeered. 2 or 3 of them got through, but anybody else, wonderful.
Now, late in 1918, when peace was declared, I believe that it took quite some time to transfer the prisoners back home to England, or in fact to wherever they had to be sent.
Yes, well, they split our camp up into 3 divisions. The first were those that were in ill health. We did have an Indian Army doctor, or doctor with the Indian Army, Englishman, Captain Packham. He was a doctor, and he looked after the health of most of the Turkish prisoners. And he split up the camp into 3 portions. First lot those who were in ill health, or those that he thought couldn't make the trek from where we were to Smyrna. I think it's called Izmir now. And the second lot were those who were well enough to walk, perhaps not quite so good. The last lot were those who he considered in perfect health. And I happen to be one of the unfortunate ones, or I should say fortunate ones. And we were, I think we're about 25 of us. We made a trek, about 4 days trek. One of the nicest trips I've ever had in my life.
Really?
We gathered all the tinned food we could get around the camp and loaded ourselves up with the stuff to take us 4 days to walk from Kidos to Smyrna. And it was a magnificent walk. And we had all the food we want. Occasionally we go through a village, Turkish village. We get all the drinks we wanted. And sometimes more, because they had a drink there. I think it's come out here now called ouzo.
Yes.
And that's the only drink we had. And some of them used to, especially some of the old Indian Army officers, used to drink a lot of ouzo. That was their...
And they were worse for wear because of that, I gather.
Yeah. Well, we'd go into these little houses and ask them for drink in Turkish. And they'd give us water or mostly ouzo,
Yes.
occasionally cognac, which wasn't bad. They got a good cognac. We got all the tobacco we required, all the smokers, in the British Turkish tobacco. We used to roll our own tobacco.
Yes.
But the Turkish were free with it, they'd give it to you.
Yes.
I think they're very charming people. I had a letter from my daughter last week. She's just returned from a trip through to parts of Turkey, and she said she fell in love with the Turks. I told her not to bring a Turk back with her. She's a single woman. But she fell in love with Turks, and she said they're magnificent people.
I appreciate why you had so much respect for the Turks.
Yes.
They seem to have treated you very well.
Yes.
Now, after returning to England in December of 1918, however, I believe that you were in fact hospitalised.
I had tummy trouble. And it was mostly caused through having very rich food after not living on such plain food. We called it Egypt. Egypt was Alexandria, to wait shipment to England. And we stopped at the best hotel there. They put us up. We lived like lords for 4 or 5 days. And it didn't agree with us. It upset us, really did. And I had tummy trouble, I suppose a type of indigestion. And when we got off the boat, after we go to the medical board there, and I explained all this to the doctor, he said, well, we'll put you in hospital 3 days until you recover. So there's several of us went into this hospital where they treated us, gradually got us right till we were fit to go home. And I went up, stopped with my relatives in Nottinghamshire. So that finished the trip, my long trip abroad.
Yes, we started off by talking about your working holiday.
Yeah.
So really it wasn't until June of 1919 that you returned home to Melbourne.
So, yes, it was in June 1919. And I don't know whether I put this in my diary, but I'll never forget it. I was in fairly poor health then. My food I was getting from my mother was upsetting me. And she said, your stomach is still out of order. You can't have this, you can't have that. She says, there's one thing, Tom, I want you to promise me. I said, what's that, Mum? She said that you don't get married for 6 months. I said, good gracious alive. I waited almost 6 years now. I'm being engaged to Dorry. 6 years did you put that question to me? Well, I said, I don't know. No, I don't think I can make that promise. But I said, why do you make it? She says, I don't think you're in fit condition to be a father. So
ever the mother.
I went almost for 6 months, but broke it down. I came over, we were married and came over here in that December.
I see.
So I arrived in Melbourne in June and Tasmania in December.
Right. And of course you settled in Ulverston.
Settled in Ulverston.
And became very successful in business.
Never could I have made a better decision. I did remarkably well in Ulverston. Charming people, so different to the city people. And they got to know me. I started in business and it never looked back. Started Piper's, started a little woodwork factory. Now it's Piper's Proprietary Limited, Piper's True Line. And I think we've got about 33 or 34 men on the payroll. But I'm now retired right out of it. In fact, it was only a week before last I officially resigned my position as a director.
I see.
But my eldest son is still chairman of that meeting, and his son, that's my grandson, they're running the factory.
It's been a long involvement, Mr. Piper. You've had, in fact, lived here for over 70 years. You've made a big contribution to this community in business life and civic life.
I think so.
Yes. And your family is still involved, of course.
Yes.
So we thank you for the opportunity of interviewing you, and we thank you for your contributions to this community as well.
Oh, thanks very much. I'm pleased to know I've been used to some use apart from flying a machine.
More than that. So once again, thank you.
Yes.
Back home to England, or in fact to wherever they had to be sent?
Yes, well, they split our camp up into 3 divisions. The first lot were those that were in ill health. We did have an Indian Army doctor, or doctor with the Indian Army, Englishman, Captain Packham. He was a doctor. And he looked after the health of most of the Turkish prisoners. And he split up the camp into 3 portions. First lot, those who were in ill health, or those that he thought couldn't make the trek from where we were to Smyrna. I think it's called Izmir now. And the second lot were those who were well enough to walk, perhaps not quite so good. The last lot were those who he considered in perfect health. And I happened to be one of the unfortunate ones, or I should say fortunate ones. And we were, I think we're about 25 of us. We made a trek, about a 4 days trek. One of the nicest trips I've ever had in my life. Really? We gathered all the tins, food we could get around the camp, and loaded ourselves up with stuff to take us 4 days to walk from Kidos to Smyrna. And it was a magnificent walk. And we had all the food we want. Occasionally we go through a village, Turkish village. We get all the drinks we wanted. And sometimes more, because they had a drink there. I think it's come out here now called ouzo. Yes. And that's the only drink we had. And some of them used to, especially some of the old Indian Army officers, used to drink a lot of ouzo. That was their...
And they were worse for wear because of that, I gather.
Yeah. Well, we go into these little houses and ask them for drink in Turkish. And they'd give us water or mostly ouzo, occasionally cognac, which wasn't bad. They got a good cognac. We got all the tobacco we required, all the smokers, in the British Turkish tobacco. We used to roll our own tobacco.
Yes.
But the Turkish were free with it, they'd give it to you.
Yes.
I think they're very charming people. I had a letter from my daughter last week. She's just returned from a trip through to parts of Turkey, and she said she fell in love with the Turks. I told her not to bring a Turk back with her. She's a single woman. But she fell in love with Turks, and she said they're magnificent people.
Yes.
Now, I understand in Melbourne there's quite a community of Turks there, but from what I hear, they're not quite so well behaved in Bidra. But I don't think they're extremely rough to cause trouble.
I can certainly appreciate why you had so much respect for the Turks.
Yes.
They seem to have treated you very well. Yes. Now, after returning to England in December of 1918, however, I believe that you were in fact hospitalised.
I had tummy trouble. It was mostly caused through having very rich food after not living on such plain food. We called it Egypt. Egypt was our Alexandria to wait shipment to England. And we stopped at the best hotel there. They put us up. We lived like lords for 4 or 5 days. And it didn't agree with us. It upset us, really did. And I had tummy trouble, I suppose a type of indigestion. And when we got off the boat, after we go to the medical board there, and I explained all this to the doctor, he said, well, we'll put you in hospital 3 days until you recover. So there's several of us went into this hospital where they treated us, gradually got us right till we were fit to go home. And I went up, stopped with my relatives in Nottinghamshire. So that finished the trip, my long trip abroad.
Yes, we started off by talking about your working holiday.
Yeah.
So really it wasn't until June of 1919 that you returned home to Melbourne.
So, yes, it was yes, in June 1919. And I don't know whether I put this in my diary, but I'll never forget it. I was in fairly poor health then. My mother, the film I was getting from my mother was upsetting me. And she said, your stomach is still out of order. You can't have this, you can't have that. She said, there's one thing, Tom, I want you to promise me. I said, what's that, Mum? She said that you don't get married for 6 months. I said, good gracious alive. I've waited almost 6 years now, I'm being engaged to Dorothy. 6 years that you put that question to me. Well, I said, I don't know. No, I don't think I can make that promise. So I said, why do you make it? She says, I don't think you're in fit condition to be a father. So,
ever the mother.
I went almost for 6 months, but broke it down. We came over, we were married and came over here in that December.
I see.
I arrived in Melbourne in June and Tasmania in December.
Right. And of course you settled in Ulverston.
They settled in Ulverston.
And became very successful in business.
Never could I have made a better decision. I did remarkably well in Ulverston. Charming people, so different to the city people. And they got to know me. And I started in business and it never looked back. Started Piper's, started a little woodwork factory. Now it's Piper's Proprietary Limited, Piper's True Line, and I think we've got about 33 or 34 men on the payroll. But I'm now retired right out of it. In fact, it was only a week before last I officially resigned my position as a director. But my eldest son is still chairman of that meeting, and his son, that's my grandson, is running the factory.
It's been a long involvement, Mr. Piper. You've had, in fact, lived here for over 70 years. You've made a big contribution to this community in business life and civic life.
I think so.
Yes. And your family is still involved, of course.
Yes.
So we thank you for the opportunity of interviewing you, and we thank you for your contributions to this community as well.
Oh, thanks very much. I'm pleased to know I've been used to some use apart from flying a machine.
More than that. So once again, thank you.
Yes.